Yo, it's Uzaiya, and I'm gonna be narrating this almost 2 hour long speed paint WIP work in progress process. I can't even call it a work in progress. It's a process documentation of this piece that I did of Milim from that time I got reincarnated as a slime. Okay, yeah, I need to get better at these intros, but this is, I need to just, sometimes it's a little rough, but you just gotta just keep doing it and get it out, because you can't just keep doing takes. This is like my third or fourth take already, and I'm not gonna be a perfectionist about this, because I'm gonna get better at this the more I do it. So I'm just gonna let this happen, just let it flow. So right now you can see that I'm doing the quick undersketch of her right now, just laying out the anatomy guidelines and hashing out the overall shape, and using the select tool to resize and rotate things if they look kind of wonky. Oh shit, oops, I clicked something accidentally. Well, since this is a 2 hour long video, I hope that I'm actually gonna have enough things to talk about for 2 hours long. Wow, non-stop talking for 2 hours. And I thought I was an introvert. Crazy. No, I think introverts can technically talk for a long time. It's just that they don't talk to other people for a long time. They can talk to themselves in a room to a microphone. Is it now? Not sure. Anyways, now you can see that I am doing the clean line art on top of the rough sketch. And like a lot of other artists, I like to keep the rough undersketch as general as possible and do most of the actual drawing on this official line art layer, because I find that if I do too many details, if I put too much energy and effort onto the undersketch, then one, I'm not going to have enough energy to actually do a proper job on the official line art layer. And two, I tend to use the undersketch as too much of a crutch in my line art layer if I have something detailed underneath. And so I don't really let my lines go loose and flow naturally. And so they don't end up looking as dynamic or strong, which is why it's better to just do your line art for the very first time, your details, like your clothing and the details of the body and everything like that, on the actual line art layer, instead of having a more solid, more detailed guideline underneath it that you trace over more or less. So I don't like tracing, because for me at least, tracing tends to take a lot of dynamism out of it. So that's why I like to only use the underlayer as a general outline for where things should be. And for everything like clothing, just draw it for the very first time on the clean line art layer, as you can see I'm doing right now. And for the clothing is actually something that I tend to struggle with a lot, because when I started out drawing, I didn't really like drawing clothing, because I like drawing the face and the hair mostly. So that's what I did most of the time. I just like slapped down some random lines to kind of like gesturally do the clothing without really focusing on like how the folds should look, how it should look in perspective and all of that. So I don't really have a lot of practice with clothing. That's why relative to the rest of the piece, it does look a little bit weak right now. But that's something that I'm trying to work on more. So I'm trying to slow down and actually trying to be more patient with the clothing, so that it actually matches up with the same level as the body and the face and the hair. Because for a piece to actually look good overall, every single component of it actually has to be at more or less the same level. If you have the end result of your piece, I found, is equal to the lowest common denominator. So if your weakest point is a 1 and the rest of it is like a 9, your piece is gonna end up feeling like a 1 or a 2, because the lowest point is like so obvious and it's dragging everything else down. And yeah, so having realized that, that's why I want to become more well-rounded and like improve on the clothing a little bit more. And because the clothing is actually something that I struggle with a little bit more, and I have to, as you can see already, I'm like erasing and going back and redoing it a lot. So because I have to redo it a lot, it takes a lot of energy. That's why I do it first. I'm drawing the clothing first before I draw the face and the hair, because I want to address it while I have the energy at the beginning of a piece. Whereas if I just spend all my energy doing the hair and the eyes, because I love doing them so much, by the time I get to the clothing, I'm not going to have the patience or the energy to actually do them properly, to do it justice, to like actually focus on it and try to make it look right. And so save the best for last and get the hard part over with first. That's how I approach this. Yeah, and there's a lot of just redrawing, like erasing and redrawing, because the first 2, 3, 4, even sometimes 5 times that I lay a shape down, I can tell that it doesn't quite look right, but at the same time, I don't really know exactly how it should look. So it's just a process of going over it again, erasing, and then reshaping it, improving upon the last time I did it, reshaping it until finally it looks right. So it's kind of like a trial and error process, and that's part of why my process takes a lot longer than a lot of the speed paint videos that I've seen out there, where they can get it down in the first 1, 2, 3 shots, basically, because they've had a lot of experience. They've done all their trial and errors earlier on, so by the time they got to their speed paint video, they can pretty just slap it down and it looks right the first or second time. But for a beginner like me, you're gonna see me in the process of actually learning and experimenting and trying to figure out what exactly the shape should be as I'm drawing the piece. And so this is that process. But at the same time, I think this process is actually what a lot of, like, the very real experience that a lot of people struggle with. So if you're someone who's not like that familiar, not that good at drawing, I guess, or who's a little rusty, hasn't been drawing for a while and returning to it, yeah, your process might look a lot like what mine does right now, a lot of redoing, and that's okay. That's part of it. That there's like nothing wrong with taking a very long time to do things. It's frustrating, of course, and ideally you don't want to take that long because you want to be cranking out pieces at a higher frequency, right? But I feel like that's just something that everyone has to go through. This is just something that everyone has to go through at one point or another. And it's pretty self-evident through this video right here. So yeah. I know a lot of people, they come to anime drawing with some experience in real life drawing, and so as a result they have a pretty good concept of how things look, how clothing folds work, how things look in perspective and folded, skewed, and all that. So they translate that into anime drawing, and that's another reason why people with some more art background probably can do things like a lot faster instead of literally learning on the spot with every single piece that you do, like I'm doing here. So yeah, so I'm not sure if you can notice, but I actually, even in my line art, I separate the layers. I separate the different components out in separate layers. So I have the body line art on one layer, and then I have the clothing line art on another layer. And the reason behind that is to allow me to be able to make corrections to one layer without really affecting or accidentally erasing part of the other layer. So if like I have the clothing layer right next to like the line art, and then I erase the clothing because there's a mistake there, I might accidentally erase the body line art, which was fine, but now it has a gap in it that I have to go over again with a line. And so now instead of having a smooth line, now it's a double, twice, 3 times over rough line because I had to fix the gap that I accidentally erased. So that's why I think it's kind of for me at least, someone who has to go back and fix and erase things a lot, I like to use separate layers even for the line art, to have the clothing and the body and the hair and the face on different layers so that I can fix one part without breaking or ruining another part. Yeah, it just takes a lot of the stress out of the process, knowing that I can always go back and fix things without messing things up. And in the end, I always squish, compile, flatten all of these layers onto one so that it's easier to manage in the coloring and post-processing. Yep, so right now I am doing the ears and the face finally, after having more or less fixed out the clothing and the body. So yeah, the face is it's something that I've drawn a lot. Like ever since I first started drawing, I pretty much just started by drawing eyes and faces. So this is something that I can pretty much do more or less intuitively. Like it doesn't, I don't have to erase and go over and fix it a lot unless it's for stylistic reasons. And so I can usually just zone out at this point. Not zone out, but kind of not have to put as much conscious effort into it. I can just kind of follow my unconscious intuition, I guess is one way to call it. Yeah. Yeah, you can see in the background of my painting, there's actually a Joe Rogan podcast. I like to listen to podcasts sometimes because it kind of feels like storytelling. Like it gives me something to absent-mindedly listen to. I like to switch it up with music because sometimes if I listen to music too much, it feels a little bit tiring because it kind of feels like the same thing a little bit over and over again, which gets it feels a bit repetitive for me. So I like to switch it up with something that I can actually semi-actively listen to, like a podcast or people telling a story or something like that. Because I like to actually semi-multitask, so have something to kind of passively zone out, which actually helps me to focus more on whatever I'm mainly focusing on. Kind of a weird thing. Being distracted helps me to focus more because I'm a really distractible person. I need a lot of like physical and mental like stimulation in order to focus, because otherwise I crave more stimulation and end up getting distracted and I can't focus on what I'm doing otherwise. So a lot of times when I'm drawing, I'm actually listening to something and I'm actually chewing or eating something like gum at the same time, just to keep my other senses preoccupied so that I'm undistracted enough to focus on what I'm doing, like drawing. Yeah, it's a bit of a ADHD thing. Not officially diagnosed, just pop culture ADHD. Pop culture definition of ADHD. Really fidgety, I guess is what you could call it. Yeah. I don't know anyone who can just literally silently draw without having anything to without like listening to music. I don't know anyone actually who doesn't listen to music while they draw. Most people I know listen to music while they draw. For sometimes music is really mood setting. Like if you're trying to draw something that has a specific mood and then you listen to music that reflects that mood, like cute if you're drawing something cute, dramatic if you're drawing something with a dramatic atmosphere, that kind of helps to kind of set the tone for your inspiration, I suppose. Yeah, so that's another use for listening to music as you draw. Yeah, I'm really just trying to just keep talking for 2 hours. Oh boy, this is actually pretty interesting. In real life, there's no bloody way I can talk for 1 or 2 hours straight with little to no breaks in between. But in reality, it's actually not that hard to keep talking because I just verbalize whatever's in my mind, and my mind is always brimming. My mind is always brimming with thoughts. So it's actually not that hard if I just blurt out whatever's in my mind at that moment. So yeah, stream of consciousness narrating, speed paint video. Yeah. Most speed paint videos just have... Oh, I'm feeling a little bit lightheaded. Okay, I think I'm running out of oxygen. Right. So I can't keep talking with absolutely no breaks. So I might take some breaks in between because... Oh boy, I'm starting to get lightheaded from lack of oxygen from talking too fast. So yeah, right now you can see that I'm redrawing the hands. Like after doing the clean line on layer, I found that the hand pose that I chose was a little bit too stiff. So I'm going back under the undersketch, choosing a more dynamic pose, and then going back on the line art layer and then fixing it, going over it with something better, with the new revised version of the hand that I think is more dynamic, less flat. Yeah, and a lot of the things that I do here, like going back, erasing, improving, does add a lot of time to the piece, which means that I end up taking a lot longer to finish something. But I think it's worth it because for me, I prioritize end result and quality over speed and output quantity. And plus, I think that if you prioritize quality, you also end up learning a lot because you're holding yourself to a higher standard and you're challenging yourself and you're drawing things of a higher, instead of just settling and going with whatever's easy, you're actually trying to make something higher level happen, which I think in the long run will help you improve your art. And so that's another reason why I'm willing to sacrifice a lot of time in order to redo and refine and make sure something is more or less perfect, up to the standard that I find acceptable. Yep, so always going back in, refining things, making sure they look right. Yeah, good thing about having different parts of the body on different layers is that you can resize them without interfering with the rest of it, which is a really nifty thing to have in digital art, especially. Like what digital art lacks in precision in terms of like being able to control your tablet pen, it definitely makes up in fixing, in post-editing flexibility. So yeah, that's one of the trade-offs you get. Although I would definitely love to be able to control my line art as easily as I could on traditional mediums. Usually on traditional mediums, like the first time I draw something, it's exactly where I need it to be. But on the tablet, you gotta go over it a few times, like rotate the piece sometimes. Yeah, just takes a lot longer that way. Oh, and another thing that I've learned through my line art process is how to have relatively clean looking line art. So in the beginning, when I would do line art, in order to have like a really clean, crisp kind of clean line art layer, I would use a really clean, crisp pen because I thought, oh, clean pen, crisp, thin pen equals crisp, thin line art. But no, that's actually not the case because sometimes the really thin pens are so thin that they actually reveal the weaknesses, the instability in your pen control. So if you're a little bit shaky, it immediately shows in like a really thin pen. And so the end result is that in the thin pen, man, tongue twisters all up in here. The end result is that in the thin pen, you actually get really shaky and unconfident looking lines because of the nature of using a tablet, right? The reality of using a tablet, you don't get as fine control. But a good way I found to offset that is to actually use a line art brush that is more forgiving of shakiness. So in my case, I found that using a thicker, more textured brush, like the pencil brush instead of like the inking pen brush, that actually allows me to draw lines, and even if I'm like a little bit shaky, it doesn't show. In a thicker, more textured brush, it masks a lot of the natural problems of pen control that I get. And the end result is actually smoother line art, even though the brush is actually thicker technically, but the line art is smoother because it hides a lot of the mistakes, a lot of the hand quiver. So yeah, the thicker brush does have a kind of chunkier, less crisp feeling. So at the end, I like to go over some of the parts with the clean, crisp line arting pen again if I want to still have that crisp, thin, sharp effect. So I can always go over it and then sharpen over it again and still have... Oh, I'm running out of breath. I'm literally getting like a headache from how fast I'm talking because I'm losing oxygen. Sorry. Oh, I need to take a little break. But yeah, see, I am actually going over some of the parts with the thin thin inking pen brush. And this way, I had the best of both worlds. I get the crisp texture of the inking pen, and I get the smooth, forgiving stability of the thicker color pencil brush that I'm using in Clip Studio Paint. And I am using the default brushes more or less at this point, and they work pretty well for me. But I do like to mix up the default brushes to achieve different effects. Yeah, something that you can notice that I like to do a lot is I really like to go back in, and even if something looks fine, I just erase it and do it again to see if I can make it better. Even better. There's always a balancing you have to do. Like you can't be too nitpicky, because otherwise you're never gonna finish anything. But you also gotta have some standards. Otherwise, you're just gonna end up with like sloppy, half-assed art at the end of the day. Okay, so now I'm doing actually one of the more challenging parts for me, which is this like it's wavy fabric. Yeah, this wavy folded fabric. Wavy fabric is actually something that's a bit challenging to me, and I used to always avoid drawing them properly. And even now, you see, I've left it until the very end. I'm only drawing it after everything else is already done, because I just know that it's gonna take me a few tries to get that. Oh, and it looks like I've actually finished the line art. So there you go. This is a complete process of the line art, and now finally we're gonna get into coloring. So with coloring, I usually like to start off with the skin, and the palette that I'm like copying pasting off right now, I think is actually I screen captured this off of the official, what do they call it? Copic marker. Yeah, Copic marker's color range for this one. I know that some people say that you shouldn't rely on preset color palettes for colors, and you should rely on your own creativity, because otherwise, if you rely on preset palettes too much, your piece is going to end up looking not that dynamic. It's going to look the same as, it's going to look a bit, I don't know, not that unique, right? If you use a preset. But I found that sometimes if I have like real trouble finding the right tone for something, it does help to just have a nice color reference that I can just pull from immediately and use. Especially in terms of different shades of things. If I haven't drawn for a while and I've lost my grasp over color combinations, it's nice to have this guideline to use, because I don't know how much, because in terms of shading, it's not just about bringing it down, it's not just about adding black to the shade, right? Sometimes if you have a yellow and you want a darker version of that yellow, it actually looks better if you add a little bit of red, for example, to that darker shade of yellow, instead of just straight up making it a literal darker shade of yellow. It ends up looking more dynamic. And I've realized that a lot of preset color palettes actually come already with these considerations. So if you don't know those rules yourself, or you don't have a good intuitive grasp for it, I think using preset colors is one way to kind of get you started in picking good colors to end up with something that looks right, until you get used to it, and then you can rely on your own judgment afterwards. Yeah, so I'm using it as a little bit of a crutch, but I think if you're going to use a crutch, Copic's official color is a good crutch. It's a good crutch that I would recommend, I suppose. Man, my neighbors are really banging the doors out there. Yeah, my way of coloring skin, I usually like to start with the lightest color first on the base layer, and then use kind of a medium tone on the edges, and then just blend them out. So I create this smooth gradient effect of the skin, and then after that, go in and do the actual shadows with the darkest shade. So in total, I use around roughly 3 shades. But then I always go back in and then blend them out and then add more in between shades if I find that more contrast or more detail is needed. I know a lot of people like to go from the base color to the darkest shade in the shadows because it helps to define a very high and good contrast level if you start with the brightest and the darkest at the very beginning. That is a good way to do it, but I found what works for me is to, because I blend out and I do the gradient first, I like to use a more medium layer so I have a smoother, less dramatic gradient, and then after that I do the actual contrast. But like with the downside of my technique is that a lot of the times it does end up looking a little muddier, like it's not as high contrast as it could have been, because I didn't start out with the highest contrasts. So I do end up having to go back in and fixing it and darkening things to bring out the right contrast levels. So that is a downside of the way that I'm doing things. But yeah, different artists probably have their own different preferences for this. Yeah, coloring skin is actually one of my favorite parts because skin is kind of smooth, so the shadows are more or less straightforward, as opposed to the clothing where you can't just color them smooth, otherwise it looks really otherwise it all looks like leather or something. Yeah, but skin you can just make it smooth, blend things out. I love blending. Yeah, so right here what I'm doing is I'm actually going in with a sharp edged brush and just drawing in the shapes of the shadows. And it doesn't matter if it's a little bit too sharp or too rough, because after I draw in the shapes, I always go back in with another brush and then I blend it in and I soften the edges so that the strokes look more painterly instead of remaining, really sharp color blocks. And I find that going in with a sharp brush first and laying in the contrast with these huge clear shapes and then blending them out ends up with much clearer and more dynamic shadows than if I just start out shading with a really smooth, really soft edge brush. Because the risk with going soft brush shading the whole way is that you end up with really muddy edges and really undefined contours. So a good way to mitigate that is to start out shading with really well-defined sharp shapes with like a sharp inking brush, and then you can always go back in and smoothen up those edges to create that natural skin-like effect. At this point, after fixing up the skin, more or less, I add in the base layer for the hair. And adding in the base layer for the hair usually helps me to see if the skin layer needs more shadows. So I'm doing it right now. After adding the hair, I realized that the skin shadows weren't dark enough. The skin was looking too faded, not high contrast enough. And so I'm going back in and fixing the shadows after adding in and seeing how it looks with the hair color on top of it. So there's a lot of working back and forth between and on top and between different layers at the same time. So I don't finish one layer completely and then move on to another one and then finish it completely. It's a really messy back and forth process where I look at how one thing looks, match it up, compare it with the other one, and then keep tweaking it while comparing and trying to match the two to each other. Yeah, you can see from the way I'm coloring the body what I mean by how it's a good idea to start out shading with the darkest shade of skin that you can and then blending it out. Because then that way you're always gonna have like you can see that line on her stomach, the high contrast edge that helps to create the illusion of dimension and of contours. Yep, now I'm filling in the color with the selection tool. Filling in the color of the clothing with the selection tool. Yeah, the way that I do these base color layers, I leave them more or less rough. More or less rough when I do the base filling, because I don't do masking. So when I do the shading on top of them, it's gonna go over the edges anyways. So at the very end, I have to go back over everything and erase the rough edges. Only because I haven't figured out how to do that layer masking thing on Clip Studio Paint. I tried using the masking tool on the layers panel, but for some reason it wasn't really working the way I needed it to. It wasn't really doing anything, so I'll have to look into how to actually do layer masking properly, because that will save a lot of time on shading, because in the end, when I have to go back over and erase the messy edges, it takes a lot of time because I have to be really careful, and then sometimes I miss things, and then I have to go back over and check again and again. So it's just a really messy process. So that's something I do have to figure out eventually at some point in Clip Studio Paint. But for now, I'm just roughly going over the base layer, not really caring about the edges too much, because I'm going to go over the edges later on anyways with the shading. Yeah, sometimes I flip back and forth between old pieces that I've done just to see like how did I do that, because sometimes a new piece you do doesn't always end up looking as good as you think it should based on what you've done before. So you kind of just reference back and see, how did I do what I did before again, just to kind of remember it again. Yeah, with art, every single new piece you do, it's always a bit of a hit or miss. There's no guarantee. Just because you did something really good before, it's no guarantee that it's always going to end up good every time after that. Every single new time is a new, how would I say this? Every single piece is a new adventure in and of itself. No settling and no coasting. You can't coast. If you coast, then it looks like shit. Unless you get to the point where like your skills are just so solidified that you can actually go autopilot because you've just memorized how to make things look good. I guess, if you've gone to that point, like really, really expert level, then maybe you can kind of, not have to think or focus or work that much and still have something that looks decent. But for me, for every single piece, I really do have to kind of focus and sometimes use references and then really think about how the shape looks and where the shadows should go instead of just drawing, relaxing on autopilot while I draw. Because if I relax on autopilot, it'll just look like a whole mumbly, jumbled mess. Yeah, it's just part of the learning process, I guess. When you're starting out, you gotta focus on every single new piece. You can't just coast. But the upside of that is that consciously drawing does tend to lead to faster improvement, because you're being very thoughtful and reflective as you're drawing at every single piece. And so the more you think, the more opportunities you have for coming up with new insights and new ideas for improvement. And so the faster you improve as a result. So finally, I'm doing the actual shading for the hair. And for the hair on this one, I went in with a medium shade, not the darkest shade again. I went with a medium shade and then did the shadow layers. And the reason I'm going with a medium shade again, as you can see right now, is because I'm doing the gradient effect. So I blur things out, make kind of a semi-gradient. And then after I have this overall gradient for kind of 3D dimensionality, I then go back in and do the actual shadows. Because I find that if I don't have this gradient and then I just straight up go in and do the shadows, it'll end up looking a bit flat and cell shading-ish. if you know what I mean. Like it's, if you only have like base layer and then shading layer and then that's it, nothing in between, it does kind of look too flat. Like it looks like 2001 anime cell shading art, basically. At least when I do it. At least when I do it that way. Yeah, again, as you can see, the downside of this method is that it looks very blurry, non-contrasty. The contours aren't very well defined, so I go back in like the contrast adjustment tool, add contrast, add brightness. I have to work with that a lot, back and forth, and then also actually go in and draw in the high contrast and then fix it, go over it again, add darker layers, yada 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 yada. So with the shading of the hair right now, I'm actually working on the shadows that I'm adding is actually on top. It's on a different layer that's on top of the base layer that I've done just now with the gradient. Because I want to be able to erase and fix and tweak this shading layer as much as possible without ruining or affecting the base layer with the gradient that I've already set up on the base layer. So yeah, I work with a lot of different layers. I don't just have one layer for the skin, one layer for the hair. No, I have one layer for the base color of the hair, and then I have a layer for the shading of the hair. And then sometimes another layer on top of that for the highlights of the hair and stuff like that. Just to, you know, allow for some, give me permission to make mistakes, because I can always go back and fix them without consequences, without risking messing up with whatever's already underneath it. Yeah, a lot of layers. Another upside to drawing your shadows on a separate layer on top of your base color layer is that if you add a layer effect to it, like multiply, and then you adjust the opacity of this layer, you can really darken or lighten the shadows after the fact. So say you've chosen a color for your shadows, and say you're drawing it on the base layer. Well, in that case, if you want to darken the shadows, then your only choice is to either go into an image contrast tool and add and increase the contrast on that whole layer, or you go over with the pen tool and go over the shadows all over again to darken it. And the downsides of those two methods is that if you add contrast to the whole base layer and everything, it's gonna change the actual color of your base layer. So if you were happy with the color of your base layer, but you just want to make your shadow layers darker, you can't really do that. Because if you use the contrast tool, it's gonna change the contrast of everything. It's gonna lighten the value of your base layer while it's darkening your shadow layers. So if I had the shadow layer actually on a separate layer from my base layer, I can darken it and do whatever I want to it without changing the color of the base layer that I'm already happy with. And so that's why I do that. It saves a lot of time, and it allows me to fix things a lot, because as I draw, I don't always get things right the first time around. So it's good to have this flexibility to be able to fix things as many times as I want. Wow. Looking at the timer here, I've pretty much been talking non-stop for like 39 minutes. That is a whole next level. It's like pausing for like 5 to 10 second breaks in between, but more or less just talking straight. Really makes me reconsider whether I'm actually an introvert or just an extrovert who hasn't found an appropriate outlet. Yeah, going in to my YouTube playlists, finding new things to listen to, and then adding in the shadows for the hair. With the shadows for the hair, I did end up, I think, discarding this and redoing it over again because I wasn't happy with how muddy this attempt of it ended up looking. So I did end up redoing this one. So yeah, with the hair, like with the clothing, I'm just going in and adding in progressively darker shades of shadow and trying to create the shapes that I think would look natural. But of course, there's like a lot of experimenting and trial and error with this one as well. And yep, I think one of the biggest challenges that I deal with is when I tend to draw really zoomed in. So when I draw really zoomed in, I tend to neglect like greater, how do I say this? I tend to neglect like greater, higher contrast, and I end up focusing too much on like the little details and fixing up the little edges, the little shapes, and like how the brushstroke looks on like 100% zoom. But in actuality, that once you zoom out to like 50% size, which is how most people will be looking at it in their feeds, like on Instagram or whatever, right? They're not going to be looking at like the full size, super zoomed in, detailed version that you're looking at when you're drawing. So one of the things that I really have to pay attention to is to make sure that the overall contrast is really, 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 really high, really, really big and apparent. So that's actually something I really struggle with, which is why after I've like worked on like these tiny little details and blurring and blending whatever zoomed in, once I zoom out, everything is just like one big blurry muddy mess basically, because I focused too much on the tiny micro details and I didn't focus enough on micro contrast level. So yeah, I think one thing that could potentially help with that is to try to shade without zooming in that much. So basically shade at maybe like 50% zoom or whatever the size will be, like as close as possible to the size that people will actually see it as. The real challenge to that though is that at that level, I get worried that my brush strokes are gonna end up looking really messy. Like the reason I'm so zoomed in is because I want to make sure that my strokes are really clean and precise, and like not like going all over the lines and overlapping each other too much. I want to make sure that they're super clean and sharp, like the way I'm doing my highlights and stuff. Like I'm always going back and erasing to make sure that the shapes are clear and clean. So the challenge, it's challenging to get it this clean when you're at like a really small zoom level, like a really far zoom level, like 50% or 25% or something like that. So yeah, the other way to do it is to just draw zoomed in and then always zoom out periodically. So I do that a lot. Zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out. And that's why this video, you're gonna see a lot of that. It's a bit epileptic, it's a bit dizzying, but honestly, it's really, really important of the work process because I'm trying to compensate for my weakness, which is that I know that I'm definitely gonna miss the forest for the trees. That's kind of the challenge that I've got going. So I have to force myself to zoom out to make sure that I'm balancing the macro effects of the piece rather than focusing too much on like tiny little micro details. Yeah, a lot of the shading, even on the hair, I'm just guessing. I'm trying to like, because I always have like this, general idea of how I want it to look based on other people's artwork that I've seen in the past, but I try not to use exact references because I want to try to develop my own style as organically as possible, and B, I find that a lot of people's coloring style is very, very, very highly specific and coordinated with their line art style. So you can't just have one line art style and just randomly find another coloring style and squish them together and have it work like perfectly well together. It's a entire composition, and that's why I can't exactly reference other people's coloring, because their line art style and their entire art style overall is different from mine. And so even if I did reference them like exactly, it's not going to turn out looking right, because there's going to be that mismatch in styles. And like maybe the way they color skin is different than the way I've already colored my skin. And so if I color my hair the way they color the hair, and it clashes with the way I've colored my skin, so then it doesn't work that way. And so that's why I tend to, even if I do use references for color, it's really minimally, I guess I would say. Or like I copy how they do one aspect of it, like contrast or like blending one aspect. I'm not able to copy the whole thing, because it wouldn't work in the context of the work that my style, basically. Yeah, and I think that's a big part of finding your own style organically. It comes with a lot of frustration, because it takes a long time. You have to fail like so many times. Like exactly, this is like super, it's what you're looking at right now. I'm going in, adding stuff, erasing it, blending it, darkening stuff, undarkening it, lightening it, blurring it out again, redoing everything. And that's because I'm trying different techniques to try to find what looks right. And it's kind of like it's the balance between trying to find something that works, as in something that just looks natural and balanced, and between balancing it with your ambitions of what you want this to look. Because sometimes you know how to do something that works, or like I know how to do basic cell shading kind of styles. That one's like really easy, really straightforward. I could do it and it will look right, it will look okay, it would like fit the standard of the cell shading style, but my ambitions are higher than just the cell shading style. So that means I'm not going to settle for just doing what I know how. I'm not just going to settle for doing only what I know how to do. And so pushing kind of beyond that and failing a ton of times, because things that you try don't always end up working as well as things that that you already know how to do. Oh yeah, well yeah, obviously, right? This is the thing with just riffing off the cuff and trying to like formulate my thoughts in my mind and trying to say it and then have it sound coherent the first time run through. Oh my gosh, it's a bit of a challenge. It's like I'm trying to like learn how to draw properly as I'm trying to learn how to make videos and narrate properly. It's just like this entire journey is just a documentation. It's just an entire documentation of how to of amateur trying to improve, pretty much. Essentially, that's what this is. Yeah, looking at this now, I actually kind of like, even though I did end up abandoning this, I do kind of like how I did the bangs, the shading on the bangs, because the highlights gave it a kind of watery kind of look that I do like. So I might think about using that in my next piece, actually. But yeah, what was I talking about before? So yeah, sometimes with art, you know how to do something and you know that it'll be decent, but it just won't be ambitious enough. And so you jump out of your comfort zone as a result by not doing the thing that you know will work, and instead just experimenting and playing around with stuff that won't work until you find a way that it does. For me, pretty much it's by accident. It's just trying things, erasing, trying things, and maybe looking at references sometimes if I get like really stuck. But yeah, it's like 80% of drawing is literally just throwing something, looking at it, evaluating it, reflecting on it, trying to think about why is this not good, and then like trying to improve on that and tweak it based on why you think it's not good enough. Yeah, a lot of back and forth. Drawing is definitely not a linear process for me. I'm always going back and forth, and I'm not afraid of like just completely deleting something and starting over again. Well, actually, no, I am afraid of it, because I feel like, I spent so much time and energy already. What if the new things I start also fails and I just wasted all this energy? But I just kind of like stopped my train of thought there because I'm trying to figure out how to say it properly. But for me at least, my ambition, I guess I could say, my ambition kind of like overwhelms that. Like I really have this compulsion to try to make it better. So even if it means that, like, you know, sunk cost, right? Like I've already sunk all this time and energy into doing something and now I gotta start over. I feel like my curiosity for how it could potentially turn out better if I started over kind of trumps my fear of having wasted all this time already on what I'm already doing. So yeah. Now for a lot of people though, this approach might seem kind of stupid because it comes off as over perfectionism or something. And yeah, you do kind of need to balance it. I mean, you can, but like if you're reworking and redoing stuff all the time, then well, you're not going to be able to upload that frequently, right? You're going to have like one piece every month or something, or even less than that if you're like way too perfectionistic. But if you lower your standards too much, you can have a lot of frequency of output, but since you're not being ambitious, you're not really allowing yourself the opportunity to improve your skills, or you're uploading stuff that's really mediocre and half-assed and comfortable. I don't know. It's not that comfortable by default is bad, but if you stay comfortable, I think your art starts to stagnate. And it's something that I've actually noticed in a lot of other artists. I'm not going to name specific names because I can't even remember specific names anyway, but I've seen this a lot, like in at least like 20 different artists for sure. Like after a while, after they've established their styles, like maybe a year or two after they've really established their styles, you can see their style, some of them, starts to get more and more sloppy or more lazy. I don't know if they are being lazy, but sometimes that's how it comes off because you can see that they're just you can kind of feel it. I don't know how to explain how you feel it, but when I look at it, I can kind of tell that when they've drawn, they've gone on autopilot. They're just following the same routine on every single artwork they do, and they're not really bringing any new technical or stylistic improvements to each new piece they do. And when artists do this, you start to see things like, for example, their anatomy or the way they draw eyes or the way they color, for example, becomes really hyper exaggerated. Like their anatomy becomes hyper exaggerated. Like, for example, if their style tends towards drawing hands kind of big, right? Then as they go on over time, the hands that they draw become bigger and bigger and more abstract until eventually it just looks completely unbalanced and totally off balance and totally weird, at least from my perspective. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe for them it's a stylistic choice, but for me, when I see things like this happen, like when I see elements of when I see elements of just personal style start to look more and more exaggerated to the point where they're starting to break down the overall balance and like aesthetic coherence of a piece, and when I don't see any other technical or experimentation or improvements, then how do I say this? Then the artwork that people upload just start to look, I don't know, more and more soulless. This is such a, I feel like this is a video all in and of itself pretty much, but I don't know, I really would have to. Oh well, did the video black out? Oh shit, I think this is an export problem. 59, yeah, I'm just gonna sit through this because I don't want to fast forward because I want to know. Okay, now we're back online. Yeah, I think I had an exporting problem in the middle. Like I didn't time the clips to match together properly before I exported. Ooh, oh boy, that sucks. But yeah, in every piece that I do, I want to try to always be conscious. Like I don't ever want to go on an autopilot. even if it's easy. And I find that when people go on autopilot, eventually they start to lose their inspiration. And then my theory is that a lot of art block is actually caused by being in autopilot mode for too often or for too long. And that's why a lot of people, when they do commissions, it tends to, after doing commissions for a long time, it tends to trigger art block. I've seen this happen so many times with people. And I think part of it is because when they're doing commissions, because of the time constraint, they're kind of forced to rush themselves. And in order to rush themselves, they have to optimize their art process. And in optimizing this, they basically can't really think too much or experiment too much, like the way I'm doing my art. Like I'm erasing and trying things, and that takes a lot of time. So in commissions, because you have a deadline, you can't do that. And so when people do commissions, they tend to become very formulaic, and so they just do what they know over and over and over again. And this actually leads to their styles becoming more rough and kind of disimprove, like whatever the word is for disimprove. Like I can see people's styles and skills actually kind of degrade a little bit if they do this for too long. Like if they do commissions and you can tell that they're rushing the commission, and then they do a lot of rush commissions, at the end of it their style suffers a little bit, because I definitely need to have like an actually really good argument for this. I definitely have to think about it longer, but I just have a hunch that with art, it's not just like you learn how to do it once and then you're set for life. Like each piece is a challenge in and of itself. So if you want each piece to look good in and of itself, just relying on your previous skills and your previous formulas isn't enough. You have to really think specifically about what this specific piece needs to look like and where it needs to go. And like you gotta really tailor it to each specific piece instead of using the same exact techniques for every single piece. Because if you do that, you're not gonna improve. And then if you get lazy, then your skills might actually go backwards. It might actually regress. And you're not adding to your. Well, okay, hang on. Scratch my ear. Freaking itches. And your art tends to look boring after that. If you just do the exact same thing for every single one, you draw the exact same pose, exact same eyes, exact same expression, and with the exact same coloring style, then it starts to look really boring, to be honest. And well, there's something to be said for having a consistent gallery style. A lot of artists on Instagram actually encourage the strategy, I guess. They actually encourage the strategy of drawing the same thing, the same aesthetic with the same color palette, because this keeps your gallery uniform, and having a uniform looking gallery is really aesthetic to look at as a collection. So I mean, that's the upside of drawing the same thing over and over again and like just not experimenting, is that your gallery at first glance, I mean, it might look, they'll match together, they'll blend together well because they're all the same damn thing. Yeah, they'll match together because they're the same thing. But as you can tell, I don't really like that approach. Like, I'd rather have the gallery page look a little bit messy and have you, going out of your comfort zone all the time and like trying different things and actually improving your art and being able to maybe do new, more interesting things with your art in the future. Like, yeah, you sacrifice the short term of your gallery looking ugly as shit, but in the long run, the more you experiment, the more potential you have for finding something new and really amazing that you haven't done before and that you haven't seen before. And plus, it's just fun. I think like art is just more fun when you're trying different things and when you're pushing your comfort zone constantly. So yeah, this became an entire tirade about my philosophy on art. But yeah, it's just I don't know. It's just, because I feel like people are actually, because of how important Instagram and Instagram like kind of apps and galleries have become for getting artists to receive attention, I feel like a lot of people are pressured to like almost stagnate and to just do the same thing over and over again because they want their gallery to look aesthetic so that people will, follow them or subscribe or whatever. And I just hate that people have to be pressured to compromise their art for something like this, for like some stupid standard like this. There's definitely value in it, but I think the thing about having, because Instagram was built for photos and it was built for photographers, and with photography, photography is a little bit different from like illustrative art, I think. Yeah, I just don't think, well, like, the point is, I don't think that artists should have to conform to a photographer portfolio standard. Like, I don't think illustrators and anime artists should be trying to tailor their art around the portfolio the way that like actual photo photographers do, because they're like two different mediums. And yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to like think about exactly how I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna just stop talking right there, because if I say any more, it's not gonna be well thought through enough that I can actually stand behind it and be okay with it. So yeah, man, I feel like every single you can see right now I've already deleted the previous version of the hair coloring I did, and now I'm starting something new all over again from scratch, because I wasn't happy with how muddy the previous one looked. And so I'm doing this one all over again, this time starting from so with the shading, I think I'm using slightly more cell shading kind of shapes for the hair shadows in this attempt. Yeah, I'm trying to make sure that my shadows have sharper and more crisp shapes in this one, because I realized that the previous version didn't look sharp enough. So I think that's what I'm doing here with this version, to try to really define the shape of the hair and the shape of the highlights and the layers, to make them like look actually make sense, instead of just being like this random blur where I just blend everything together and like there's no real contours or layers. Yep, starting over again. Yep, just adding in the shadows. I feel like every single one of these, like, I really hope that most of my narration videos of my like technically quote unquote speed paint, sped up paint videos, I really hope that not all of them are gonna be 2 hours long. Oh boy. But then again, like I could like cut the clips and like splice them together, and so like I won't show the whole process, and so that will shorten it up a bit. But I feel like the point of a video like this is to show literally like every step of the way, like the real process, like every brushstroke I make, every freaking mistake I make. I really want to show that. Because one day, if I end up improving like significantly, I want to be able to have this record of my history of like actual struggle and actual failure. I want it documented. Yeah, I want to document it, because a lot of things are really curated, and so you're not seeing the actual reality of the process of creation. But I really want to keep my own history of my process of making mistakes and struggling, and through this, time and time again, with each successive artwork, improving a little bit, getting a little better, and then struggling again, because I'll always be pushing my comfort zone, struggling, improving, just the whole process, and then like just have this whole collection of stuff that just shows basically the story of as an artist trying to make better art, trying to draw better. Basically, the story of an artist. That sounds so cheesy. Yeah, thing with these long ass videos is also I can't really script it. How do you script it? I mean, I could script a 2-hour video, but then I'm not gonna be able to do one video every week if I script a 2-hour video, because I also do have a job where I have to earn money, so I can't script a 2-hour video, so yeah. So you're just left with this. So yeah, so you can see just now I toggled on off. So I didn't delete the previous version I did. So it's kind of like a backup plan, right? I just kept it hidden on a different layer. So if this experiment turns out to like be a mega failure, I can always just, undo it and use the version I already have from before. So the only thing I'm sacrificing is time, really. So it's really nothing to lose at this point. Yeah. Oh, this version actually does look better than the previous one. It's a lot higher contrast. Okay, yeah, I am glad I redid it then. Not too bad. Yep, the color, brightness, contrast, hue adjustment tool is my best friend. Yeah. It also allows me to not worry too much or be too insecure about how things look the first time around, because I know I can always just adjust it and tweak it around with the color adjustment tools later on anyways. So I can just basically just not worry about it and just follow my intuition and just choose whatever color that I think would work. And being able to follow your intuition, well, for me, being able to follow my intuition when I do something helps me to get into more of a flow state. So not overthinking. I think it's momentum. When you don't overthink and when you don't stop yourself or doubt yourself too much, you build momentum. And this momentum is actually what I think creates whatever the opposite of art block is. Flow. I guess it's flow state. Yeah, the most important thing is just momentum, basically. Don't overthink it. Yeah, like something could totally fail. It could look totally ugly. But I mean, like, as long as you keep moving, you can always erase it and do it again. So there's really no reason to just like stop and like not do anything. Although I have to admit, I still do that. Like I still get overwhelmed. Like if I look at something, for example, if the skin is colored like really well, and then like the hair is kind of like not matching up to the standard of the skin, then I start to get a little bit like overwhelmed. I'm like, and I start to get scared about coloring the rest of the hair, because I'm like, like there's this pressure now to make it look as good as the skin does. And now when I feel that, oh, did I just knock the microphone? I'm sorry. And now when I feel that pressure, and I'm not, and I start to be afraid of coloring the hair, and I just get stuck because I want it to look good, but I don't know how. So now I'm afraid of even getting started because I don't think that what I'm gonna do the first time is actually gonna work. Yeah, so like I still struggle with that, honestly. Like I say that, oh yeah, I know this, thinking this way, working this way works for me, and like it does. But even knowing that, I still struggle with it anyways. No, I think that's just like a human nature thing. That's just part of being human. Like you can understand the principle, you can understand the lesson, but like that doesn't mean that you stop being tested on the lesson. Yeah, you can understand the lesson, but that doesn't mean you stop being like challenged and tested on the lesson. And yeah, art, improving on art is basically dealing with those like sort of struggles and challenges and like emotional blockages again and again. Yeah, there are days where like I look at my artwork and I've been like art blocked and I don't know how to continue, how to progress. Everything just looks bad and I don't know how to fix it. And so I'm just sitting there in like this sea of overwhelm and I just don't even know how to start, you know? But usually once I start, if I can just like push my ass to just start, I mean eventually I figure something out. But like that doesn't change the fact that it does still suck to be sitting there and not knowing where to start. I feel like that's just something that I'm just always gonna deal with for like forever, basically. Yeah. Yeah, so like making art is basically a constant process of getting through those kind of feelings. Yeah. Like you love doing it enough that you're just like, well, here it is again. But like what are you going to do, right? Like what are you going to do? Are you going to quit? Are you going to stop? No. Because it feels worse to quit. So, I mean, no choice but to just like freaking do it. Even if it takes you like an hour of staring at it and freaking overwhelmed and not knowing what to do. I mean, at the end of the day, eventually you always return. You always get your ass back in the game or something. Yeah. I hate talking in cliches because I feel like every time someone else utters something that could be considered a cliche, I automatically like zone out because I've heard it so much that even if the cliche makes sense, I just start to tune it out. So I hate talking in cliches, but at the same time, sometimes the best way to explain something is the cliche, because I mean it's a cliche for a bloody reason. People said it so many times that it got annoying, but people said it so many times because because it made sense for them, so that they wanted to say it so many times. And yeah, right now I am coloring the sleeve. Yep, coloring the hair. Not the hair, coloring the clothing. The folds of the clothing, I always have to like experiment around a lot with it. Like again, I probably mentioned this, but clothing is something that I really struggle with. Clothing folds. Yeah, when I was little, I did take some like art lessons, kind of basic art lessons, but I never really took them long enough to get to the stage of drawing advanced things like complicated fabrics or like fabric on models. I never really got to say. I was like always in the lessons for like, I don't know, drawing like cubes, like apples and stuff like that. And so I can shade spherical shapes fairly well, but because I have like a little bit of kind of training, quote unquote training on it. But with stuff like fabrics and clothing, nah, I'm like starting over from scratch. I never really formally did that the proper way. So yeah, that's part of why I struggle with it a lot. Oh yeah, and with coloring, I found that something that's good to do is to hide your liner layers now and then, just to make sure that your coloring layers can, stand by themselves, so that they're not really relying on the liner as a crutch. Like the liner helps to kind of highlight the outlines and to add more contrast, but you shouldn't be relying on them to define the edges and the edges between things, basically. And so it's a good idea to hide the liner layer to make sure that the shading by itself denotes and shows enough 3D and enough of the contrast and enough of the edges. Unless your style is just like really line art heavy, in which case then yeah, probably don't need to do that. Again, this is probably like a personal decision. Everyone has like their own preferences with things like this. Yeah, and you can see one thing I really like to do with the clothing is I like to add a little bit of the skin color, like the little bit of the pink, onto the dark blue of the clothing, and that helps to give it a kind of a translucent effect almost, because it kind of creates so it does two things. One, it kind of creates the illusion that the fabric is kind of transparent, so you can kind of see a little bit of the skin underneath it. Or B, it creates this reflective effect. So it kind of creates this illusion that the color of the skin is reflecting off of the fabric, and that's why you see the pink of the skin on the fabric, because it's reflecting off the fabric, right? And so this reflection kind of adds more dimensionality onto something. I don't know how to explain it, but like even in still life drawing, they always tell you that the shadow isn't just a flat darkness. The shadow isn't just darkness, you know? The shadow contains like the edge of the very, very edge of the object where it touches the paper. It's actually reflective. The paper, the surface, or whatever the object's sitting on is reflective, and this reflection will reflect back onto the object, which means that the very edge of your object that touches the paper or your surface will actually be lighter than some other parts of your shadow. So that's, you know, that's just something that they teach you in still life class that helps to make something look more realistic and less flat. Like if you just did a flat shadow with no reflection in it, A, it's not going to look realistic because that's not how the world actually works, because in the real world there's reflective light. And B, it's just going to look really heavy, you know? If you don't have any colors, any light inside of it, even if it's a shadow, it's just going to look really heavy because it's just flat darkness. Man, I really hope this is coming through. I really hope this comes through. This is probably like one of those things that is better when you're demonstrating it to like show it visually so that people can look at it and see, oh yeah, that's like, it really does work like that. But yeah, I'm doing my best to try to explain what I see in my head and try to like match my words to create the image that I see in my head right now. Yep, now I'm finally shading the skin on the hands. Yeah, I always start out with a cell shading technique, which means I go in with a dark color and I just color in the darkest shadows with these really straight, sharp edges, and then I blend them out and blend them in at the end to make them look more natural and have like a smoother skin-like or like watery, flowy, skin-like kind of texture. Yeah, you see, even on the hands, I like in the shadow of the palm, under the fingers, I added in like a little bit of a brightness there, right? So that's kind of like the thing that I like to do in shadows. This, if when appropriate, this is like totally judgment call, but whenever like when appropriate, I add in a little spot of light in the shadow just to give the shadow like some further dimensionality. A sense of light, a sense of being in space, stuff like that. Alright, and now this video is an hour and 18 minutes through, so there's approximately half an hour left. Not bad. Yeah, adding in like the darkest shadows, the darkest shades with a cell shading technique. Before, when I colored skin though, I didn't do it like this. Before, when I colored skin, I would just use like a slightly darker color than the base color with like a really soft airbrush kind of brush and just like gingerly move over it to try to gradually create dimensionality. But it always ended up muddy because, ooh, excuse me. Oh boy, that's disgusting. Yeah, because when you do that, I mean, you could, in theory, it could work if you spend enough time and eventually got to like really high contrast shadows. But like a lot of people, especially beginners like me, tend to become too afraid, you know, to go too dark. So I feel like we have to get over that fear fear of going too dark. You have to go darker, go darker, go darker, go darker. I think I still remember like my still life teacher telling me, go darker, go darker. Don't be afraid of going too dark. Don't be afraid of going darker. Yeah, a lot of beginners, they're afraid of messing up, so they're afraid of going too dark, and so their piece ends up looking muddy and not high contrast enough. A good way around this is to just start with one of the darker shades and then just slap it in the darkest shadow layers, and then you can blend it out and then add in the medium tones after that to make it look less like, you know, less fucking exaggerated. Yeah, I'm cleaning up the edges. I think because I'm nearly done with the hair and the clothing, and so I'm basically just tightening up the edges and erasing wherever the color moved over the line art, whenever the color overlapped over the line art, and like filling in the parts of the edges where the color didn't completely fill the line art. So yeah, going back in and like cleaning over it after I've more or less finished the shading. Yeah, this is one of my less favorite things to do because it's tedious, and also I sometimes I miss parts, so I only notice that, oh yeah, I forgot to fix this part of the color going over the line art only after I export it and look at it more closely, and so I gotta go back and do it again. So that's why it's probably a good idea for me to try to figure out how to do that layer clip mask thing, so that I don't have to worry about having to go back over all the edges and then like erasing all the messy edges at the very end manually. Yeah, I think I just now I just brought up the contrast, I mean the saturation on the skin a little bit to make the overall piece even brighter, and to make it match kind of the brightness level that I have going on in the clothing and like the gold on her. Yep, adding a bit of the skin color onto the clothing for that translucent and reflective effect. Yeah, looking back over it now, I feel like when I think I overdid it a little bit when I was adding like the skin color onto part of the clothing, like on the sleeves. Before adding the pink, the shadows on the sleeves were actually a lot more visible, but after adding in the pink, it kind of lightened it, and so it doesn't really look like there's a clear shadow on the sleeve, on the front, on her front sleeve anymore. So I do kind of regret that a little bit, so probably I have to be careful about stuff like that in the future. Yeah, looking back over it again, you always find out mistakes and things that you could have improved or done better. It's just frustrating, but like, I feel like you're never gonna not see stuff that you can improve on. So I don't know, just like try to get over it and try to be aware of it in the next piece I do. And that's why I think it's also a good idea to not leave too much of a gap in between doing artworks, because otherwise by the time you start your next artwork you might have forgotten a lot of the lessons that you've learned by doing the previous one. Whereas if I had just finished coloring this like today, and then like tomorrow I immediately start coloring again, I'm still gonna remember a lot of the lessons and mistakes that I got from this one to apply tomorrow to my next artwork, right? Whereas if there's like a week or 2 weeks in between, I might have forgotten a lot of things, and so I have to like make the same mistakes again and like forget them again, and then like, yeah, it's just a lot easier to remember your lessons and to keep improving on what you've already learned if you draw more frequently, if you draw closer together. Like if you draw more things, like if you finish something and then like all your lessons are still fresh in your head, and then you start something else while they're still fresh in your head. Yeah. I think that's one of the big reasons why people always tell you to like draw frequently, draw every day. Yeah. But I mean, it's hard though. It's hard when you kind of, each piece takes a long time. Like for me, each piece could take like several days to color, like several days to line art, 1 or 2 days to line art, and then like I don't know, 3 to 5 days sometimes to finish coloring it. So by the time I finish coloring this piece, it's been like 5 days. So I might have forgotten on day 5, I might have forgotten some of the lessons that I learned on day 1 because I just take so long, so many days to color. But you know, what can you do about that, right? Just try to draw faster, try to draw more. I think at least if you're drawing every day, it's not going to be too bad as long as you're still at least drawing every single day. I mean, I'm not like 80. I'm not 80, okay? I'm in my 20s. My memory's not like super shot or anything. I can still remember shit from like a week ago. Come on, it's not that bad. Yeah, coloring the eyes at the very end. Yeah, eye coloring, drawing eyes, the shape of eyes, drawing eyes line art, easy. Coloring eyes, hard. Yeah. It's hard because there's just so many options. There's so many ways you can color eyes. I swear, there's like 50 different styles out there for coloring eyes. It's just, oh boy. It's just hard to decide which direction to go. And I often find myself like, I start doing one style of coloring, and then like as I'm doing it, another style pops into my head, and then so I start going in that direction, but then like this direction doesn't really quite fit what I started with, and so it starts to clash and look awkward, and like it's just a big mess. So I feel like sometimes with coloring you just have to stay focused and committed sometimes, right? Sometimes I just gotta try and stay committed to the style that I started out trying to do. And if it doesn't work, then I can just start over and try something else. But sometimes mixing different styles into one thing, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's really a hit or miss. Yeah, that's like my forever struggle. Too many things I want to do. I feel like that's just like the story of my life in general. I want to do too many things. I want to try too many things, and like I throw them all together, and it's just like this big weird mess. But hey, the upside of that is that I mean, like, you end up with a mess like 99% of the time, but 1% of the time when it actually works, then you come up with something that's truly original, right? So I guess that's the upside of being like super, of like wanting to throw like all these different types of shit all together. Hey, sometimes it works. Sometimes it works. Sometimes when magic happens, oh yeah, it really happens. Yeah, that's a problem of looking at references. Like, I collect a lot of reference pictures of people's artwork that I just really like and that I think kind of fit the ambitions of what I want to go for. But like, for example, I have like 6 references for how to color eyes, and I'm not sure exactly which one I want to follow. So sometimes I might start incorporating like a bit from each of them, and it doesn't always work out. So it's just a process of like continuing to do this until I eventually find some weird combination that does work out. Because again, I can't bring myself to just straight up copy one style or one person's style. It's not even about plagiarism. No, it's not even about that. It's just that I'm so indecisive that I can't even commit to copying one single style. That's literally my problem. It's like super like indecision taken to the extreme. I love them all. I want to use all of them. I don't just want to do one of them. Why not both? Why not all 5? Story of my life. Oh yeah, even with the eyes, I'm coloring on different layers. So the base is one layer, and then the shadow might be another layer, and then the highlight will be another layer. And the reason I do this is so that I can tweak the colors independently. I can like tweak the hue, the saturation, the brightness of each layer independently. Because I'm still at a point where I'm not super good at picking colors. So I do need that flexibility to be able to change things around in hindsight if I need to. Oh yeah, even with coloring the eyes, I think I did 2 different versions, like 2 different styles of coloring the eyes. just to be sure that I'm really okay with it. Just so that I don't regret going with just so I don't regret settling. Dude, like it seriously sounds like I have commitment issues or something. It's like I've never just committed to one style. I always need to try something different and have it and then like compare both of them. Like choose one of the 2. I can never just like do one style and just stay with it and just be okay with it. End of story. No, I can't do that. I have to always be trying at least something else. Or if I think of it. Sometimes I literally don't have any idea except for my first idea. In those cases, then yeah, I commit because I don't have any other choice. But if I can think of something else, like another way to do things, I'll do it. So I have 2 versions of coloring the hair. I have 2 versions of coloring the eyes. And just pick one of the 2. Yeah, it's a kind of weird way of working, I gotta admit. It's a very non-efficient way of working. But it's also more fun this way. I feel like the fun part about art is like the process, literally, of experimenting and trying things, looking at something, having like a theory about how it could look, and then like testing that theory out and just seeing how it plays out in reality. And if it's good, great, wonderful. If it's not, well, try something else. And it's just like the process of just doing that. Yeah, even redid the liner of the eyes because I realized that my initial liner of the eyes was a little bit too messy. Like the brush strokes weren't confident enough. They're a little bit messy. Yeah, the brush strokes were not confident enough, and so now I'm going back over and doing them again, tracing over it, redrawing it. Sometimes I think I talk too fast, and so my tongue can't really catch up, and so I start like stuttering. Like I don't stutter because I'm mentally challenged, okay? I stutter because I'm physically challenged. My body can't bloody keep up with my mind sometimes. Struggle. But then like all other people see when they hear you stutter is like, oh wow, this person's like a fucking idiot. Oh, they don't know how to talk. They don't have anything going on in their heads, so they're like struggling to get the words out. Not struggling to not struggling to have words, struggling to coordinate my words with this freaking clumsy ass body. Yeah, this video is just like an entire it's like a stream of consciousness. Welcome to my opinion about everything on this world, from art to style to life to stuttering. Dude, I legit wish I could just talk like this, just like candidly, just off the cuff, like this in real life. Yeah, in real life, I'm a lot more in real life, like as if internet is not part of real life. It's like I'm not alive right now. I'm not living life right now. So it's not real life. But yeah, like quote unquote in real life, like I'm a lot more quieter because I filter what I say a lot more because I want to try to be mindful of the audience because I mean, like right now technically no one's listening, so there's no one to really bother or annoy if I say something that's like really uninteresting or really annoying, right? But when I'm in the company of other people, I want to try to be considerate of them, so I try not to say things that could come off as being offensive or like I don't know, presumptuous, stuff like that. But then what it ends up being is just I just don't say shit at all, like 50-60% of the time. But I think I'm starting to get a little bit better with that, because I've actually found that when I do say things, sometimes when I just do say things off the cuff like I'm doing now, it actually hits. Like people are actually able to respond to it and like relate to it somehow. So I mean, that's really good. And so ever since realizing that, I'm just like, well, you know what? Why not? It helps me to enjoy life too. Yeah, life's just more fun if you can just say what you really think. Because then that way you're actually dealing in reality. Oh yeah, what am I doing now with the hair? Oh yeah, so I hid the initial liner layer and I'm going over it with a colored layer, because the original liner was black, I think, and I didn't really like how that looked. So now I'm retracing some parts of the body and the hair with a more maroon or like dark red, because I feel like that looks more natural as an outline as opposed to just a flat black. So yeah, I'm just tracing over it now. Oh, and then showing the layer again. So on the very top, I have the colored maroon line art, and then on the bottom, I still have the original black line art. And so the maroon just lightens the line art wherever I've colored it over, and then I just keep the black where it still works, and like for the body and the rest of it. I mean, if something works, there's no sense in totally throwing it out, right? And having the double layered line art, having 2 layers of lines, actually makes it look a little bit thicker and more, gives it more presence. So, I mean, I like that too. So I'm keeping both layers on. Yeah, it really just depends on each piece. This doesn't always work with every piece. Like not every piece should have a dark line art. Like the one that I'm working on right now, the one that's gonna come after this, I've actually kept the line art pretty thin and pretty minimal, because I wanted to go for a more of a thick shading style. Not quite line art less, but moving closer to it. And eventually I do want to kind of try doing something without line art. I mean, well, not without line art, but you know, those styles where it's just thick color shading all the way and you can't really see like outlines. Like it's more the colors and the shading that brings out the contours and the edges rather than the line. So I do want to try doing that at one point eventually. But that requires very, very thick shading, which is quite time consuming too. So yeah, slowly moving towards it. So yeah, in every single piece I do, I don't always follow the same process or use the same techniques. It just depends on whatever I'm feeling and whatever I imagine in my mind and whatever suits the actual piece itself. Yeah, I don't really want to be an artist who's pigeonholed into one very specific, very, very recognizable style, because it just feels too limiting. Like, I need to be free. Like, I need to have the freedom to know that I can do anything I want. Like, even if it means doing something completely different and completely outside of my usual style. Like, at least I want the option to be able to do that always. I think that's a personal preference. Yeah. I don't think there's anything wrong with people who have a consistent style, because I actually like a lot of artists for their style. So I don't really mind the fact that they keep drawing in that style. But it's just that for me to enjoy art, I need to have the freedom to be able to switch things up whenever the impulse hits, whenever I feel like it. Yeah, and also in life in general, that's also true for me. Like, I want to be able to always have the freedom, I always have the option of doing something different and trying something new. That will, yeah. It just, I just like being free. I just like being free. I just like being free, wild and free. Yep, going back over the edges, cleaning them up, adding a little bit of a colored outline to make the edges of the clothing more crisp and less blurry, less messy, cleaning up the messy brush edges. Why did I pause? I pause a lot in like the middle of my drawing to like think or something. I don't know. To zone out, space out. Or probably like get a drink or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing about recording yourself drawing. Like, there's this pressure that you can't really stop for long periods of time, the way you could if you weren't recording yourself, because you don't want the video to like just stop for like several seconds, for like 10 seconds or 30 seconds or something like that. Like, I don't really stop for that long, so it's not really a big deal. But like, if I wasn't recording myself drawing, I would definitely take more breaks in between, like food breaks, or like just to sit there and look at it and think about it or stuff like that. But yeah, if I'm recording, then there's that pressure to like not stop, because I don't want the end video to have all these pauses in it. So yeah, that's kind of the weird thing about making videos like these, and like how it affects my drawing process. Well, it's a good thing, I guess. It forces me to keep going and to not just like stop and procrastinate or something like that. Yep, adding in the shading of this part, adding in the shadows on this. Yeah, when I get down to stuff like this, because it's not really near the center of her body, I don't feel much pressure shading parts like this. And so I'm a lot more free. And because I'm a lot more free, actually, paradoxically, because I didn't really, the less shit I give, sometimes the better it turns out, weirdly. Like this part of her leg, while I was coloring it, I wasn't really overthinking it. I was just doing whatever, going with the flow, or like whatever you can call it, right? And it actually turned out to be one of my favorite parts of this whole piece. Like, I shit you not, this part of her leg is actually one of my favorite parts of this whole entire thing. It just looks right. And I think that was a result of me feeling relaxed when I was drawing it, like not being pressured about it, like not really caring if it ends up shit. And paradoxically, it ends up really, really nice. It's like literally the same thing people say about dating. The less invested you are, the better it turns out. It's gotta like give no shits. It's weird, isn't it? The less shit you give, the better things turn out in life. The more invested you are in a very specific outcome, the more likely, you are not necessarily to fail, the more likely you are to be traumatized by whatever happens by it. And then you start self-sabotaging because you're traumatized. Yeah, I'm giving her this little like magic ability only because I just assume that she probably has a power like this. But in actuality, this little black flame power thing that coming out of your hand, that's actually Benimaru's ability. That's actually not explicitly Milim's ability. So yeah, little detail there. But I didn't really, like when I was doing the brainstorming, the undersketch, I already had this concept in mind. And at that point, it didn't really occur to me that this was actually Benimaru's ability and not Milim's. But at this point, I've already designed the entire pose around this. So too late, it's gotta run with it. And it's not too far of a stretch to assume that she might have something like this, right? But yeah, this is actually literally Benimaru's power that I just gave to Milim because maybe she has something that looks like this. Who knows? Giving people the wrong powers. Yep, trial and error. Trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. 80% of the entire process. Well, no, not 80%, maybe 50%. Yeah, 50% is just trial and error. Saturation adjustment tool is your best friend. It's your backup plan. Always good to have a backup plan in life and in arts. Well, not always. Not always. Sometimes it's better to just go all in, because when you know that you don't have a backup plan, then you're committed to whatever path you're on, and so you're more willing to fight to make it work. So in that case, not having a backup plan, not having the safety of a backup plan, lights a fire under your ass to make sure that what you're doing better frickin' work. But that's a life thing. That's not like an art thing. Like in art, yeah, just experiment. You can have like... And that's why I have all these layers, all these different versions of things as my backup plan. Just in case shit goes wrong, I can always go back to it. And that allows me to kind of like be more bold with whatever I'm experimenting with. Because I know, well, yeah, who cares if I fuck up? I got my backup plan. that feel when I'm realizing my art process is literally my entire life philosophy. The way I do art is the way I do life. Yeah. I'm starting to have like doubts on the eyes. Yep. See, there you go. I'm redoing the eyes. I actually didn't end up using this new style for the eyes. I did end up using the first version I did, but I still think it was worth it to experiment with the second version, just to, you know, try something new, and, you know, to scratch that itch. And I feel like everything you do in art, even if it doesn't go anywhere, like you still end up learning new techniques from it, because at least you know what doesn't work. And in the process of trying what doesn't work, I actually do find at least one or two like peripheral things that do work, and so I take that and I try that technique. See, these are all my art references. What did I say? I have at least like I have more than one reference when it comes to coloring styles that I want to learn from. But yeah, I feel like even when I'm making mistakes and trying something that doesn't work, in the process of trying that, I still learn, like, you know, I still learn things that do work. And then so I take those things and then I try it in the next piece I do. Like with this one, I really like how it looks at this point with the almost watery effect inside of the eyes, like on the edges. The blending of the edges kind of has this watery blending effect instead of having a really sharp effect. And while that didn't really work well with this, I just bit my tongue. While that didn't really work well with this particular piece, I do want to try that in the future with something else, with another piece maybe. Excuse my burps. I had like 3 sips of cola before recording this, so not too bad. It's not too much. Oh, looking at this coloring, I want to go and draw. I want to draw. I have like such an itch to draw right now, but I have to finish recording this video. Struggles. Yeah, I have this like serious itch to draw. Ooh, I really want to color. And I want to draw liner. I haven't actually drawn a full liner in about a week, over a week. Because this past week I've been working on coloring something. And because I struggled a little bit, I was experimenting yet again with the coloring on that one. And so it's taken a long time. And so I haven't really been able to finish that to be able to start a new line art piece. But I think I should be finishing that soon, so I can scratch this itch of drawing something. Like, I feel like ideally I'd just be able to like finish a whole piece every 2 days so that I can scratch this itch to like keep drawing something new, keep drawing something. Yeah. But I'm a bit slow and I'm a bit perfectionistic. Like, I don't want to settle, I don't want to rush it. And so just gotta be patient. As I get better and more familiar with it, I'm gonna get faster. And then I can probably scratch my itch of being able to draw line art every 3 days maybe, instead of every 7 to 14 days. Yeah, because I feel like if I'm not doing something for more than a week, more than 3 to 4 days, I feel like I can feel my skills like slipping away, and that bothers me so much. But I'm doing the best I can to try to work as fast as I can and to try to balance other things in my life with art. Yeah, it's a constant work in progress. But yeah, I wish I could draw every day so that I don't have to feel like I'm letting my skills atrophy. Because that feeling bothers me so much. But at the same time, I gotta prioritize other things, you know, like earning money and also being patient with the art to make sure that it actually looks good, and to make sure that I get these videos out, because this is also another part of my project. Like the documentation process is also important to me. And so I do have to take the time out to do all of these things because I've decided that they're all important to me. But it is frustrating. It is frustrating when they all take so much time. And I just have this itch that I just want to just go back and draw something. But, you know, I see the value. I see the value in doing all these things. So it's just, yeah, I'm toggling a bit back and forth between the eyes right now to see which one I prefer. I did end up preferring the old one. I exported both. But I think this one ended up looking a little bit too googly-eyed. I didn't really like that because I feel like it didn't really match the overall style as much as the other one did. Toggle back and forth, toggle back and forth. Change the colors, change the contrast. And I think hashtag indecision, and that's it. And that's the end of it. Wow, great. We're at the end of this. We finished. Yeah, thanks for, if you stuck around this long, thanks a lot for listening to this whole thing. I hope it was like kind of entertaining or enlightening. I don't know. So I'll see you, I guess, at the next video once I finish the current piece that I'm working on. So I'm gonna try to do a video like this for every. I want to do this for. I'm not gonna actually do this for every piece that I'm doing because I want to try to do more than one piece a week. But I'm definitely gonna do this video thing or try to do this video thing for at least one piece of art every single week. So yeah, see you in a few days. Peace out.